Welcome to this presentation, Setting Up a Self-Assessment Team for the Race Equality Charter. In this session, we will be providing you with hints and tips for setting up an effective SAT to support your race equality submission. The SAT is a crucial element of the REC process, and getting it right at the start can help steer your work in the right direction. So therefore, it is important that some thought is put into how it will be developed.
The
The
SAT is one of the
main
main
building
building blocks that will act as a foundation for progressing race equality work in your institution.
Therefore, it is important that some thought goes into how it is established and how it will actually work, and this will be very specific to the culture and structure of your institution. The main things to think about are the aim and purpose of the SAT. So be clear about the objectives and what you're actually setting it up for. SAT recruitment. So also being clear about how you are going to recruit members of your SAT. Is there going to be an open call? Where are you going to advertise? Who's going to be sending out communications? All those kinds of things need to be focused on. We then go to representation. So to have a think about who is essential in terms of sitting on your SAT, and then who you would like to have, and to ensure that there is representation of different roles across the university and also different functions. What resources will be needed? Many forget that actually setting up a SAT is quite resource intensive, so do think about the resources that might be needed, and that's through staff but also through budgeting as well. Also, the structure of the SAT is something to give some thought to, because it's important that when you set it up, it actually fits within the existing governance structure of the institution, and that it actually feeds into some relevant committee that can actually make a difference and also lead on race equality work. And then finally, we think about timelines. So timelines are really important. So it would be good to map out from time of initiation, when you're setting up your SAT, right up to the date that you're going to be submitting your application. So some kind of project plan with times and dates would be really useful too. We always like to remind colleagues of REC's guiding principles, and to always come back to those 5 guiding principles when carrying out any aspect of Race Equality Charter work. So the first one, racial inequalities are not necessarily overt, isolated incidents and can manifest themselves in everyday situations, processes and behaviours, is actually really important, because we don't want you to just focus on the overt everyday scenarios around racism. We actually want you to look at the more subtle behaviours too, racial microaggressions, and the way that sometimes discrimination can be embedded within our policies, processes and practices. So that guiding principle is quite important. The second one is about inclusion. UK higher education cannot reach its full potential until individuals from all ethnic backgrounds can benefit equally from the opportunities it affords. So it really is about ensuring that everyone is included in university life so that they can aspire and fulfill their true potential. The third one, solutions to racial inequalities, must focus on institutional cultural change, avoiding a deficit model. We do encourage positive action programs, so specific development programs focused on BAME leaders, or development programs for specific grades and positively promoting attendance from BAME staff. We're absolutely fine with that. But what we also want institutions to do is to look inwards, to look at their own policies and processes, and look at real institutional cultural change. So we want to see both happening in institutions. And the fourth one, Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff and students are not a homogenous group, is just to ensure that you actually do drill down and look at the experience of different groups within the BAME category. We do talk about BAME communities and we do group issues, but again, we know that the experience is different for different groups of people, and that's why we ask for that within the data. So to keep that in mind through all the different aspects of work that you do on race equality. And number 5, the All individuals have multiple identities, and the intersection of those identities should be considered wherever possible. So whenever you can, to look at the way that the different protected characteristics intersect, and to also try and gain data or qualitative data, particularly around intersectionality, if you can do that. And that's what we encourage. So those are the 5 guiding principles that we always like to come back to ensure that we look through the lens of these guiding principles through every stage of our Race Equality Charter work. When we think of the aim and purpose of the SAT, we need to think carefully of how the SAT can be the most effective in our institutions. And this goes hand in hand of who will be chairing and how often you meet. We do say meet at least 3 times a year, but realistically we know that this may not give the attention that is needed for such significant work. We know that some SATs that are chaired by the Vice Chancellor or their deputies may meet less frequently, but have action groups that meet in between the meetings, and this does work for them. We know that some SATs meet monthly, so it's more on a regular basis, and they monitor progress and steer the work, so they have a closer steer on the REC journey. It's important to remember that the SAT work is about the identification of issues through the quantitative and qualitative data that you've collected, so the actual self-assessment process. It's also about the development of aims, priorities, actions, and initiatives. So once you've looked at all that data, to then think about how you can actually deal with any of the gaps or issues that have been identified. So there's a level of creativity that's also needed in this. We also look for institution-wide commitment and involvement and engagement. So by being a SAT member, you also take responsibility to ensure that you communicate with the people around you in your teams and departments about the work that's going on the Race Equality Charter. And also the allocation of resources. So once you've thought of particular priorities and actions, to then identify how these priorities and actions can be resourced. SAT members do act as ambassadors or champions for advancing race equality, so it's important to bear that in mind when looking at membership. They also steer the REC work towards a submission, so to be clear, one of the main aims for a SAT member is to ensure that we're on track with the Race Equality Charter work. It's also about reviewing the progress of REC, so keeping up to date with development and making sure that you're hitting your deadlines and timelines, in order to get your submission on track and submitted at the date that you intend to submit. The role of the SAT member also is about influencing change and gaining buy-in and engagement in their own areas. So if you're on the SAT because of a particular function that's really important to your REC work, you will have that responsibility of going back into your areas and influencing change and engagement. It's also about reviewing data and evidence and contributing to developing smart actions. So a little bit about what we touched on before about being creative and looking at the data and coming up with activities and priorities that could be included in the action plan. A significant part of SAT membership is also about troubleshooting. So any barriers or blocks that arise to progressing work, you may be expected to go back into those departments or teams or to working groups to try and unblock those barriers. And then again, reviewing and monitoring of the action plan once it has been submitted. So as a SAT member, work doesn't stop when you've submitted. Obviously, you can breathe a sigh of relief, but after that, a lot of hard work then starts to look at review and implementation of your action plan. So who should chair the SAT? Well, we do advise that the chair should be an academic at Pro Vice Chancellor level or equivalent. They will need to understand the guiding principles, so the 5 guiding principles that we've already touched on, and they are also within the letter that the VC actually signs off when joining the Race Equality Charter. They would also have to act as an ambassador that cares about advancing race equality rather than actually winning the award itself. Um, a large part of the role will also be about building team dynamics and developing a common purpose for all SAT members. So camaraderie will be needed to get things done. So the chair will probably play a part in developing this and ensuring that everybody feels comfortable and able to participate within the SAT. This goes along with ensuring that everyone is heard and valued. Um, so making sure that everybody feels that they can contribute openly, and also particularly BAME members of staff and students that are on the SAT. It can be sometimes quite difficult to be open and honest about race and the lived experience within the institution that you're in. So it's important that the chair of the SAT creates that environment and creates a safe space to have those kinds of discussions. This goes hand in hand with managing those difficult conversations and discussions. And as chair, be prepared to be challenged also, because there may be lots of discussion about your findings and your data. You may have uncovered some sensitive or uncomfortable things that you may have to discuss, and there may be challenges back. So it's about the chair being able to manage these kinds of discussions, and again having that safe space that people feel that they can speak openly about these findings and their experiences. And then finally, the chair would hopefully feed into the council or the board of governors to ensure that race equality work is discussed at every level. Recruitment of your SAT members is really important. You do need to ensure that you have colleagues on the SAT from a cross section of functions where you think it will be really important in order to advance race equality in your institution, but you also need to balance that out to ensure that you have membership of colleagues that understand race inequality and how it manifests in higher education, and also the voice of BAME staff and students. So we've seen lots of different examples in the past, but some of the best examples we have seen are those that are part nominated and then a call also for volunteers. It's important to remember that there may be colleagues that you haven't even thought about that would like to contribute on such an important issue. So that's why we say that a call out across the university is also quite important. Some SATs we have found also offer the chance for observers to sit on meetings to promote inclusivity and transparency. So you have your regular SAT membership, but every month or every time you meet, you do a call out and ask for any observers that would like to come in and see how the REC SAT actually works. And this promotes engagement and transparency. In terms of your call outs, we've seen examples of using the institution's newsletter and their internal communications, and this has worked well. However, what is becoming more apparent is that SAT work needs to be recognised as other major pieces of work, and therefore should be valued and recognised in workload allocation, and maybe also reward for those that carry out this labour intensive work. Some institutions offer a fixed sum to SAT members to go towards training and development, and some are recognised through reward systems. This is not essential, but it is a way of recognising the valuable work that SAT members undertake. We've also seen examples of SATs engaging with the relevant student societies, so for example the African, Caribbean, Asian or Chinese societies, to see if they would like to feed in or contribute to the SAT. So those are just some of the ideas of how you could recruit.
It's important that we don't make the SAT too big, but we also want to ensure that we have a cross-representation of the different functions. But do have a think about who you think should be on it, but bearing in mind that we don't want these stats so big that it becomes unmanageable, and it also depends on the size of your institution. It is important to remind you that the SAT should have representation of BAME staff and students, and also that they are supported in and out of the SAT environment to speak about race equality within the institution. Think about all these different groups of staff and then prioritise who should actually be on the SAT itself.
So we've already touched on resources, but it's important to reiterate that we do need to think about the staff time for SAT membership. So attending the actual SAT meetings, but the work in between too. So think about the amount of workload hours that will be needed for SAT members, and also whether it will be recognised in promotions and reward and any training development budgets that will be allocated. We also try and highlight the fact that there is some dedicated project management and data analyses that is attached to the Race Equality Charter work, and don't underestimate this. So you will need to have an expert on data as part of your SAT, and also some dedicated project management. So whoever is actually leading this work on the ground, they would benefit from some project management training or project management support. And then again, we go back to budget, and within your budget to think about any training that you would like to undertake for SAT members. So it could be training on race equality within HE, unconscious bias. We've seen previous SAT ideas around developing unconscious bias training, racial microaggressions. Um, Also, we've seen SATs bringing in external facilitators for particular discussions. And we've also seen some action plans that have been, in a way, costed up. So while they're developing the action plan, they also attach some resource to it to give an idea of how much this work is going to cost. And then again, when we talk about resources, we talk about staff management buy-in and leadership, and senior management actually acting as ambassadors, and cascading the messages around race equality. So those are all the types of things that you need to think about when you focus on resources needed for your SAT. So going back to the structure of your SAT, there are lots of things to think about. So are you going to have a core team? How large is that team going to be? And will you have subgroups that run from that will report regularly back to the core SAT team? These subgroups, are they going to be specialist areas? Are they going to be action groups? How are you going to involve specialists within the main SAT work? Are they going to be called in for specific meetings, etc.? Some institutions have timetable meetings well in advance so that they have invited people already in the different areas that they think are going to be important to the rec work. Also think about faculty reps and department reps and how they will also be involved in and engaged. If you are thinking of having subgroups, activity groups, or you can have anybody that's going to lead on those, and how are they going to feed into the main group? Also, it's important that all the SAT members recognise where this SAT is going to lead into and how regular, and how it will be governed, and its relationship with the other committees that you have. So if you have an Athena Swan SAT, do think about how it's going to fit in with the REC SAT too. And also do think, we've talked about this before, but once you've submitted, how will the SAT operate? Some thought does need to go into what the structure will look like once you have submitted. We have seen some SATs restructure. After submission, it becomes a little bit smaller, or there's an offshoot review and monitoring group that then reports to the Vice Chancellor or the Chair, or to another particular board or committee. So those things need to be thought about well in advance in terms of how your structure is going to work. Here you will see that we've just provided an example of a timeline in terms of your rec journey. We always say that you need at least 18 months to carry out all the stages effectively, but this is just guidance, so it really is up to yourself. We've just added the different stages and the things we feel are important in terms of developing an effective SAT. So there you'll see around team establishment, you'll see consultation with relevant networks and staff and students. We do regularly see SATs when they develop that there is some involvement and engagement with their BAME or race equality networks. Obviously the recruitment of the chair, sending invites out, considering training and development. It should be considered right at the beginning when you're establishing an SAT. It's important that people get training at the beginning so they feel that they are prepared for the work ahead. And also the submission date. Obviously, people need to know what they're working towards and what they've signed up to. We've got the data gathering stage there because it is actually huge. We do know that. So you will need to set aside quite a bit of time to generate the quantitative data, to get all the collection done in a format that SAT members can actually look and analyze it and then think about what it means for them and have those discussions. There also needs to be a lot of prep for the surveys that are needed, the rec staff and student survey. So do consider when you would like to have them done, because obviously we know that there are many different surveys throughout the academic year and we do hear about survey fatigue. So think carefully of when you'd like to survey your staff and students. So after you have collected all your data, then you obviously carry out your analysis, and this can happen in many different ways. So I've certainly heard of SATs that will take different areas of the data and have particular themed meetings. So one may be on student data, one may be on staff data. Some members may be required to do some prep work before the actual meeting to identify any concerns or trends that they've seen. There may be particular people tasked within the SAT to look at certain elements of the data and to come back with their analysis too. So it's up to you largely how you organise and carry out this work. Again, don't underestimate it. That there is a lot of work needed. You need to understand data and understand analysis. So not everybody will be able to do this, but you certainly need some of that expertise on your SAT. So when you're looking at this data, you can then start to think about your priorities and actions and your long-term, medium and short-term. We do say that your action plan should be 3 years because obviously the award is for 3 years, so your action plan should be a 3-year action plan. And then again, the whole action planning process where we create smart actions. And a lot of people do fall foul of this. It needs to be a smart action plan. So actually, when you think about your training and development, maybe a small training session on developing smart actions might work. And actually, what meaningful outcomes actually are for the institution. Again, sometimes we see submissions slip up on this, that what is the actual outcome? What are you trying to achieve here? And then go back to the 5 guiding principles to ensure that you're developing smart actions through the lens of the 5 guiding principles for the Race Equality Charter. So just to recap, some of the key things to remember is that the establishment of the SAT needs to be transparent and that BAME staff and students need to be involved right from initiation. Also remember that it is about creating an environment on the SAT that BAME members feel that they can speak openly and honestly about the lived experience in the university and are encouraged and empowered to have those discussions, and the chair provides a safe environment for those discussions to be undertaken. Effective leadership is needed from the chair, and again we've already talked about championing race equality, so being an ambassador for race equality and actually illustrating that they are 100% committed to this work. Again, it's about making sure that you have the right balance of people on your SAT for it to work. And again, that's around functions, around expertise and understanding. And know that they have signed up for quite a lot of work. So then this ties into the fact that, you know, how are you going to recognize this work? Have you thought about this, and are people aware of the level of work that is needed when you sit on the REC SAT? I think we've said also in this presentation that you do need to take time to build your SAT properly, ensuring that structure works and it works for your institution, and that you have mapped out the structure of how it's going to work, frequency of meetings, subgroups, core groups, action groups, and how it's going to report into the wider university community, but also how it will feed up to the board and council. And again, don't forget the five guiding principles. This work is so intensive that sometimes we do get so stuck in the process that we forget the five guiding principles and the lens of which we have signed up to. So please do, at regular intervals, go back to those guiding principles. And finally, be as creative as you like in this work. There's lots of guidance and, instructions on what to do. But remember, this is about creating institutional cultural change. So this is absolutely huge, but you are contributing to something that's really important and significant to your university. So do enjoy this work and remember that you're doing something really important here. Also, don't be afraid of inviting external race equality specialists to your SAT. Um, it's just really important sometimes to gain an external insight on your race equality work, or have somebody who can operate as a critical friend to the work that you're doing, just to give you that extra insight. And do talk to other institutions to see how they have set up their SATs, their experience, and ideas they may have that they've actually tried out that could work for your institution. And remember, we are here to help. We are a small race equality charter team, but we have expertise in this area. We read so many submissions and therefore have generated lots of ideas. And so we can always talk to you, have discussions with you about your work, any areas of concern, any areas that you need more ideas on. You can always drop us a line and one of us will get back to you. um, a lot of it will be over the phone. We do sometimes come out to institutions, but that needs to be organised appropriately. But certainly do contact us in the first instance when you have a query or you would just like to run something by us. We absolutely want to help and support our institutions in achieving their goals in race equality and achieving their awards and creating a better environment for everybody within their university.